Afternoon, everybody. This is Tom Davis. Thank you for calling in. We're, as you know, going to be talking about the RAD first component, public housing conversion contract forms and documents. Glad you're all here. Thank you for coming. To let you know who is here from HUD, in addition to me, there is Will Levy in the Office of RECAP, Bev Rudman in the Office of RECAP, Kathy Soroka in the Office of General Counsel, and Vicki Longos also in the Office of General Counsel. Most of the presentation will be Will and Kathy and Vicki. Bev and I are here to answer questions and that kind of thing. To give you a little context of where we are, as many of you know, HUD issued draft form documents under the Paperwork Reduction Act for comments back in the spring. We are doing a pretty comprehensive, maybe late winter, we are doing a pretty comprehensive revision of the documents, the RCC use agreement, other documents that we have been using since the beginning of the program, now that we've had a couple years of experience with them and with the program. Certain things were clear they could be improved, so we did a pretty comprehensive look at this set of documents. We put them out for public comment. There was a 60-day period of public comment. We received a lot of really good feedback, so for those of you who submitted feedback, thank you very much. It was very helpful, and I hope that you see at least some of your ideas reflected in the revised documents. We then, after the comment period closed, we reviewed all the feedback, continued working on the documents, revised the documents, and have now put them out, as you know, for another 30-day comment period. At the end of the 30-day comment period, there will be a period where we look at your comments and OMB takes a final look at the documents, and then we will issue final documents. At that point, we will be moving to use those uniformly across the RAD transactions. So that's sort of the history of. At this point, I think I'm going to turn the program over to Will Levy, who is going to talk us through a little bit about how we're going to work through them and get into the substance. So thank you very much for joining us, and Will, please take it forward.
Thanks, Tom. So first thing is, lots of you know this who've been on these before, but this is a discussion, and there's a feature on the GoToMeeting where you can raise your hand if you have a question or have a comment. We will be working through the different documents, and after we provide a brief overview of the changes, we'll see if there are any questions or comments on those specific documents. So please feel free. We love it when folks call in and we can hear your voice, but if you are shy and wish to write in, that's okay too. Just raise your hand. There's a raise your hand function on the window. Okay, so just an overview. For the first component, which really is the focus of this presentation, there's 5 key documents that we use once you're in the program. There's the financing plan, and for PRA purposes, we have a template. It's a paper document, but obviously folks are used to submitting their financing plan online on the RAD resource desk, and that will continue to come that way. Once the financing plan is reviewed and approved, HUD issues a RAD conversion commitment that memorializes what we've agreed to in the financing plan and sets out the terms going forward to complete conversion. And then at conversion, you enter into either a TBRA or a TBV half contract with specific RAD modifications, as well as record a RAD use agreement on the land. So those are the key documents. You'll see that on our website there are a couple of additional documents that are posted. One is the Fair Housing Accessibility and Relocation Checklist, but that's kind of absorbed within the financing plan submission. You'll also see a standard labor standards addendum to that HAP contract. And again, that's kind of absorbed within the HAP contract, and we'll talk about them there. Okay, so the first item we'll talk about is the financing plan. We will be providing specific training on the financing plan once it is final, once this 30-day public comment period is completed, and then OMB has provided their approval of the documents. So what we'll talk about today will just be pretty high level to orient you to some of the changes. So first off, we made a number of modifications to the specific data fields so that the information that is in the financing plan feeds more cleanly into the RCC. So you'll see some of the changes in the RCC try to really better describe what the transaction is. The best place where the transaction is described today is the financing plan. And so those are really just kind of conforming bridge changes. We've created 2 new submission areas, one for you to upload resident comments from any meetings that were held after the CHAP was awarded. The RAD notice requires a meeting and sometimes more than one meeting to be held following the issuance of the CHAP. So we'd like to see those comments and how you've responded to them from residents. We've also created an area for folks to upload the title report. We often, and this is one of the many areas where we've learned a lot over the course of the program and found that folks who waited until closing to look at title often found their closings significantly delayed as unexpected things came up, and so we like to see that start coming in earlier. The other major change you'll see that just requires some explanation is in the financing plan you'll see that there's an item called Fair Housing, Civil Rights, and Relocation Checklist. Right now, that continues to be what's known as the FHEO, Accessibility and Relocation Checklist. But there will be a future PRA, sorry for the acronym, a Paperwork Reduction Act approved document that will consolidate the fair housing, civil rights, and relocation items into a single form. We've gotten a lot of feedback again over the years that folks would like to have clear instruction and process over how fair housing, civil rights, and relocation matters are approved, and one of the key vehicles for that will be a consolidated form that will be known as the Fair Housing, Civil Rights, and Relocation Checklist. So this is kind of put there as a placeholder for what's coming down the pike very shortly. As I just to reiterate, as I said earlier, this form that's listed on our website is a paper version, but don't worry, you won't be submitting a paper version. You'll continue to interact and submit the documents through the resource desk. And especially on the financing plan, where really it's more than just filling out some basic information or a signature, we'll be providing a training once those fields are finalized and the resource desk is updated, so that you have a clear understanding of how and what to submit. Let's check to see, Leanne, if we have any questions or anything going on with the financing plan. Okay. Okay. We'll move on to the RAD conversion commitment, and I will turn to my colleague in the Office of General Counsel, Kathy Soroka, to talk through the changes there.
Great, thanks, Will. We are really excited about the RCC. Anybody who knows me knows that I geek out on this all the time. I get so excited about it. We have totally revamped the RCC. We have taken all of the deal-specific information and pulled it either to the first 2 pages or to the exhibits. And so those first 2 pages of the RCC will now create a nice summary of the transaction. We've strived to better better capture the key features of the transaction and to better describe the transaction. And we've also tried to simplify the whole RCC, try to really make it more clear what our requirements for the transaction are, and specifically with the deal-specific information, either in the first 2 pages or on the exhibits, really trying to simplify that and have those be something that makes sense. We also got a lot of comments asking us to to provide a draft of the RCC before it's officially issued. So you should be getting those. You should be getting drafts of the RCC. If you know that your deal is going to approval committee, or you know that your RCC is going to be issued and you haven't received an RCC, you can ask for that. I know that we hope that will save a lot of time on amendments going forward. Okay. Let's turn to the RCC itself, just to show you some of the changes that we've made to it, and just to point out some of the things that we've just talked about. Again, we have this chart on the first 2 pages, and with laying out the deal-specific information. You'll also note that it clearly contemplates the project owner as well as the PHA. Let me scroll up a little bit there just to show. Yeah, perfect. We've got information there specifically now for the proposed project owner as well as for the PHA involved, so as to avoid some of the confusion that we had before in terms of who the owner was and the PHA, and are you transferring ownership and whatnot, etc. This is more clear with that kind of information, as well as the identification of the converting project and the covered project, whether or not that's the same physical project or whether there's a transfer of assistance that can easily be identified here. We also then, to scroll down a little bit, show you some of that highlighted information there. We've got stuff like a clearer description of the number of units intended for RAD and intending to be removed from PIC. We know that's been a little bit of a stumbling block for folks along the way, as well as this box here on the top of page 2 is where you see a lot of the key features of, now that we've had experience for the past couple years. These are the kinds of items that we find to be relevant in both in terms of memorializing this is the deal that we're talking about, and this is the commitment that we're issuing is for this deal, these features of the deal, as well as to help us in our review of the transaction as we move towards closing. And there is a space there for some narrative description if necessary. Some of the key features do call for an elaboration. Okay. If we go through, there had been some concerns about the timing of the RCC, and we did make some adjustments to some of the timing and consolidated some of the areas where there were sort of deadlines and HUD's right to rescind and whatnot. But the key timing remains the same. You need to execute the RCC within 30 days of receipt, and you do have 90 days to close, or we'll need to reevaluate your financing plan. The closing checklist is now attached as Exhibit E in lieu of the sort of separate and confusing closing preparations. The closing preparations are the checklist items that we require. With respect to the use agreement, we do maintain that the use agreement stays in first priority position on title, and that's been confusing to some folks. And we do look for title reports for both the converting project and the covered project. We do note that when we get a report, obviously we're going to be asking for the exceptions on title, so just go ahead and send those too. We want to know what's on there, particularly the declarations of trust. Right? We need to release the declaration of trust, so we need to review the declaration of trust. Don't hide the ball on that. Just send it right along. Also, to clarify, I know there's been a lot of frustrating amendments, unclear if oh, at what point do we need to make a change? I've changed the number in the sources and uses, and I need to, is basically requiring an RCC amendment on every transaction. We're hopeful that going forward we will not need to amend the RCCs quite so often, both because with the reviewing of the drafts, we'll get some of the template naming information correct, and then also with this understanding that only material changes to the transaction, to the sources and uses will require amendments. Okay, you will still want to see that final certified sources and uses statement. And we also have made some clarifications there with respect to sources and uses and the use of public housing funds. Made some clarifications there in terms of what we mean. You know, in addition to public housing funds, the operating fund and capital fund dollars that are converting for the rent payments, as you guys know, you have the opportunity to convert other funds like reserve funds to use those for the transaction in a number of ways. One we've just clarified, look, your shot to do that is at closing, right? After the transaction closes, we're not doing any more conversions. And also, you are converting those funds. They're no longer public housing funds. So if you've dedicated funds to a RAD project, you can't go back and use those for public housing. Those get transferred. And then we've also provided some more clarification. There's been a lot of question about whether such funds are subject to a general depository agreement or whatnot. We've added some clarifying information here about funds have to be in a GDA until they're dispersed for the use and sources and uses. As a common example, if funds are being used as an initial deposit in replacement reserves, that's their use, that's their end use, and you don't need to have those. The replacement reserve does not need to be under a GDA. Again, just talking about this is your one shot. You convert those public housing funds to Section 8 at closing. Can't use more funds later. And we've added some clarification language here in terms of the contract funding. We know there's been some confusion about what are the funds and how much there is available when. We've clarified the funding in the year of conversion versus in the initial calendar year. And ongoing. So we've made some clarifications there. We've acknowledged that the year and the contract amount in the first year might be less than subsequent years. We've also consolidated the work, the planned construction or rehabilitation. It was a little bit confusing for folks. There was some terminology used for FHA, some terminology used for RAD. We've now put all of the work requirements into Exhibit D. We've labeled them as work, whether they are repairs or work that needs to be done prior to closing or post-closing is clearly identified and all subject to part of the deal. I know there's been some confusion about Davis-Bacon requirements. That's why we have, as Will previously mentioned, we've got the labor standards addendum to be added to the HAP contract, and we do clarify the requirements. Here. Any of the work that's if there is any work set forth on Exhibit D, that's going to basically qualify as work, construction, or rehabilitation. That's defined in the Davis-Bacon Act and the subsequent guidance that we list there. So look for the labor standards addendum to attach to the HAP contract. Okay. Also, we do note, and we'll see that when we get to the HAP contracts, that failure to complete the work by the deadlines identified in Exhibit D will be a default under the HAP contract. We do differentiate, your expected completion date with really the deadline for when it becomes a default, but that's important to note. We're not using AHAPs in RAD. The HAP contract is entered into, and you're getting funds under the HAP contract. So it's important that that element, the work element, be maintained. Okay. We have clarified some of the requirements for counsel. We do urge each and every one of you to retain counsel to assist in your transaction. These are complicated transactions, and look for an updated borrower and project owner, PHA and project owner legal opinion templates in the near future. Got some more guidance coming out on whether this is your last public housing unit. Public housing closeout, look for more guidance on that in the future. And as we've said, we've simplified the exhibits. This is it. We're not having, the RCC does not have the use agreement as an exhibit. You know, you've got to, we just mentioned in the body that you need a use agreement. We're not going to put the HAP contracts as an exhibit to the RCC. You know you need a HAP contract. You know what the forms are. This is it. These are the exhibits. And if we run through the exhibits just to point out specifically, special conditions are going to be listed separately and easily identified as Exhibit A on every transaction, whatever the special conditions are. There's a template here for the sources and uses, as well as the contract work, rents, and the rent. If you want to scroll down just to Exhibit D, just to show that, so I think that's a little bit different. I will note that the rent schedule for Exhibit C should be, is a little bit different, and that thank you. It's a little bit different. Also, if there's different rent schedules because of, let's say, tenant-paid utilities or something like that, or different HAP contracts, each of those should be listed here. In Exhibit D, again, we've got, you list all the work. You list the work to be done before closing. If it's a requirement that it be done before closing, you list the work to be done after closing, and you've got the estimated completion date and the final completion deadline. And then we'll have the closing checklist there at the end. Okay, that is the RCC. Questions? Questions on the RCC?
So I think there was one written question that was submitted about the use of, can we expand that screen so we can actually see?
I'll read it out loud. It says, we're trying to close in December. If we use the existing documents and the documents are revised before we close, will we have to revise our documents?
No, great question. You will not need to. There will be an effective date, as Tom started out in the beginning discussing. We're still in the middle of the PRA process, so these documents are not the required forms yet, and they may still be tweaked depending on your comments and on OMB's comments, generally the effective date will indicate, hey, if you receive your RCC by a certain date, then you must use these forms. Certainly, we won't make you change forms in the middle of preparations for closing. Okie dokie.
So I think we'll move on now to the RAD use agreement. Vicki, would you mind taking over this one?
Sure. Good afternoon, Vicki Longes here. Kathy and I geeked out a little bit yesterday with our field counsel, going over some of the very same points, only sort of in a different sort of legalistic kind of discussion, detail and definition. Yeah. But the thing I want to mention, although we cannot go into all of the comments that we received, all of those comments are actually chronicled in the notice that we published in the Federal Register, and we addressed each and every one, saying what we did, why we did it, why we weren't doing a few of them. But I think you'll be pleased to see that in most cases we accommodated most of the comments that we received in some way or another. So with the use agreement, again, trying to improve it so that this document does provide clarity around the units and the property that is to be covered by this use agreement. This use agreement, is taking the place on these properties of what had been held by the Declaration of Trust or the Declaration of Restrictive Covenant. And the most important thing about this document, since it is recorded, it is an agreement that will also remain in effect until HUD executes the release of this document. One of the major things that we did, we found no need to attach as an exhibit to this document is the RCC. The RCC stands alone. It's executed. It's legally effective. It doesn't become more legally effective by being recorded with this. If anything, it just sort of adds to cost and confusion. This new use agreement also indicates the consent that's needed from HUD for certain transfers, conveyances, or encumbrances, with some exceptions. And we also incorporate the lender rider. Kathy will talk a little bit later. We've incorporated all the riders in existing documents rather than having separate riders. So, there's not any confusion. And, we're going to have some of them in the HAP contract that are appropriate to be there. The lender rider is appropriate to be here. So let's look quickly at the document itself. One of the first things that we did, just to sort of simplify coordination, is to add spacing for preparation and a recording return. So we see a lot if you do that anyway, so we thought we should just take that as a helpful comment. One of the biggest items we did is in this very first paragraph of the agreement. And as Kathy was trying to point out earlier, we really wanted to be clear about who is the project owner, what's the PHA doing, and if there is another owner, let's say one owns the fee estate, one owns, has a ground lease. We're trying to be clear about that in this very first paragraph. This was also added to address the ground lease ownership. So we've had questions whether or not the ground lease could be recorded prior to the recordation of the use agreement, and this certainly paves the way for that. On the next page, you'll notice that we've added more clarity to distinguish the units under this agreement, which are RAD units, from other property that may be also covered by the legal description of the property in the exhibit to this use agreement. We see that happening from time to time, but this is just to bring more clarity as to what are the RAD units that are covered. The next whereas paragraph, you're probably thinking, what is missing between that paragraph and the next paragraph? Well, any of our legal counsel friends on this call should be happy to see that we are no longer requiring you to fill in the DOT or the DORC recordation and release information here. The DORC and the DOT and its release will stand on its own as a recorded document so that anyone going in to examine the title will find it there. We were finding problems because even though we were asking you to fill in the blank and we were indicating the initial date and filing information of the original DOT or DOT or several DOTs or DORCs, then when we released them or partially released them, and that was always a little confusing too, we found that these things don't get recorded at the same time that these documents are being entered into. So it was just an unnecessary step, so all gone. In the next and final whereas paragraph, we make a point about adding clarity to the priority in term in the last statement about termination. Also, as to term in the second section of the agreement, note that the length of the term must now be specified in the blank that's provided there. In section number 3, for some reason we always seem to get this question about what about the HUD-approved manager unit. So we put in that particular exception, as well as some of the other things that have to be satisfied with respect to the restrictions for eligible tenants and rents. Paragraph 5 changed a little bit by adding the term agents, because obviously the fair housing and civil rights requirements apply to PHAs, but they also apply to agents acting legally on the behalf of the project owners. So all of them would be responsible for these requirements. Paragraph number 7, we made some revisions there. Their former subordination clause was removed, and we have now a sort of replacement process. And also on the RAD resource desk, we now have sample subordination agreement with language that we find acceptable. We also here have some other exceptions of where you would not need to have HUD approval for certain changes, such as leases in the normal course of operating property, or conveyance of land for like streets and alleys and so forth. These are sort of the same kinds of exceptions we've had for years in public housing and the declarations of trust. But basically, all liens must be subordinate to this use agreement unless authorized by HUD or as mentioned in this paragraph. And at the end of that paragraph, note that it is HUD that decides whether the assistance is transferred if there is a transfer of ownership. In paragraph number 8, I believe this is a much firmer statement than you'd seen before as to the status of the agreement until it is released by HUD. Jumping quickly down to section 14, you'll see here is the former lender rider information. So one less attachment. And then if you look at the signature pages, we've tried to simplify those because since most of these documents are being signed and notarized here in Washington, we had to make them compliant with the local requirements here. There may be state and local requirements for witness lines. If there are requirements for that, please put them in. But otherwise, we find more often than not, they're not required. So just trying to save a little time and energy here. Finally, you should see recognition of the fact that of who is actually signing this. Notice we've added some clarification here to address the ground leased ownership situation by having the project owner sign and then possibly inserting the PHA or the fee owner a little later down there. And then finally, Exhibit A, which will be the property description, the meets and bounds description you'll insert there. That's a minimum. We don't expect to see things like street addresses, but street addresses and other information could be added to further assist someone in identifying the project for, say, tax purposes. I think that hits the key points. Are there any questions? Okay.
Thanks, Vicki. While we see if there are any other questions, also just want to point out that the font is bigger, which I think is very welcome.
Oh, okay.
Welcome change to the
Well, you know, the problem with forms, and I've done so many forms, is we're always trying to condense so we don't have so many pages, you know, and that kind of works against that point.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so we will move on to the HAP contract. And I'll start just walking through the slide, some of the major changes to the HAP contract, and really you'll see parallel changes on the PBV and PBRA side. We received a number of comments saying that the discussion on how the funding flows in the contract was confusing. So in a few different applications, we improved the language there to make it clear how the funding flows from the public housing subsidy in the initial year of conversion, and then from the Section 8 side following at the beginning of the calendar year following conversion, and driving through that basic point. There is now a standardized Davis-Bacon addendum, the addendum to the HAP contract labor standards.
You don't have to search through Federal Register notices anymore to find that. It's there.
Right.
We didn't make it different. We just made it more available.
Right. It should make it just a lot easier to attach it and to standardize it. It strengthens and clarifies 2 points about the mandatory contract renewal, just making it clear that a contract administrator is also under, not just the owner is required to offer the renewal of the contract, as well as strengthening and clarifying the incorporation of resident procedural rights into leases and other documents. It provides HUD consent for certain very common assignments that occur in low-income housing tax credit transactions. And it incorporates, really helpfully, the lender and tax credit rider provisions that had been kind of at-request optional items, but now it's all in the same form, so it makes it a lot easier. We'll go down into the contract itself. Let's start with the PBRA Part 1 contract. Kathy and I will go, and others, if they have anything else to add, we'll go down the items. So the first one is statutory changes during term. So this is a standard provision in all multifamily contracts. It had been our practice to, whenever anybody asked to include this into the HAB contract, to accept that request. And now it is formally in, or will be in, all contracts. So bringing it into full conformity with standard multifamily contracts. This is, and then the next one in section 1.3, it's the first of multiple places where we, as I said, make much more clear the how the funding works in the year of conversion, in that initial year.
We've also clarified the terminology as well, that tried to consistently use the term year of conversion versus, I think, initial year. I don't remember the terms. We've clarified the terminology, okay? The terminology is clarified.
We heard from multiple folks, again, that this just wasn't as crystal clear as it could be. Please let us know if we've hit the mark this time. We think we did.
Do we go first?
Okay. Moving on to the exhibits, so there's a additional rent schedule exhibit for those who use the tenant-paid utility savings provision to increase contract rents because following rehab, there will be a savings to utility allowances because of energy-efficient work. And we have added as a standard exhibit the Davis-Bacon labor standards addendum. So you'll see those two in there. And then the next couple of items, I believe, again, are along the lines of clarifying conforming changes to the year of conversion funding language.
Because the money's important.
The money's important. It's kind of a big deal for the HAB contract. So the next item, which is number 6 here on the screen, contract administrator's obligation to offer to renew and owner's obligation to accept offers to renew. I believe in the existing version, only the second part of that is in there, and so this reiterates that HUD and the contract administrator also have an obligation to offer. This doesn't change anything. This is consistent with what the RAD statute and the RAD notice say, but this is more fully enshrining it into the contract itself. That's it on part 1. Let's move over to part 2.
And that's what we were talking about before in terms of the condition of the property and the completion of the work. This is where we're saying, hey, this is our deadline. You need to complete the work. I promise to complete the work by this day. Otherwise, it's a violation of the HAB contract. It's fall under the HAB contract, right? We're not using a HAB. We're going straight to the HAB, so we need a provision like this. I think that has been clarified somewhat. Also, make sure you attach the grievance procedures, and then here's your promise to uphold the grievance process. So that's what they say. Don't be taken aback by the terminology. We're just implementing the language in the notice. Okay. Again, there are specific grievance procedures. There's specific grievance procedures for termination of tenancy that apply under RAD, don't apply under non-RAD PBV, PBRA. Attach those grievance procedures to your tenant leases.
Is anyone dizzy yet?
Here's where we start to see some consents to assignment here. We certainly do say that we lay out here that you can't transfer the contract except with HUD approval, and then we provide some consents in this in this section. A lot of it has been there before. Some of it is new. A lot of it is sort of making standard some of the policies that we've had in place. I do want to point out here what's highlighted here in E, some of the common LIHTC requests. So if the owner is assigning the contract to one of its members, or if the general partner is assigning its interest in the project to a limited partner, and respectively, we're allowing those. But we are making those subject to the provisions of 2.25, which we'll get to in a second. That's the LIHTC provisions. Those are the former LIHTC riders. Again, because the RAD statute has ownership and control requirements that are present in non-RAD PBV or PBRA, we can't just allow blanket assignments, or assignments. There has to be a limitation, and the permanent replacement owner has to be approved by HUD. Not really the case non-RAD PBV or PBRA to the same extent. The collateral assignment to the contract is provided for in 2.4, which we'll jump down to that now. Those are the lender provisions that were the lender rider. Right? We've incorporated those in, just as we did the lender rider to the use agreement, just as we incorporated that into the body of the use agreement. Here again, we've incorporated the lender provisions into the body of the HAP contract. A couple of phrases in this language. First line, the holder of any HUD-approved mortgage encumbering the property, right? So the holder of any HUD-approved mortgage. So again, look, if you don't need to ask us for these provisions, this is automatically, you've gotten the consents that we've listed here. And also, if there are multiple mortgage holders, if there's second mortgage or whatnot, all of the mortgage holders are covered by this language. Also, at the beginning of the highlighted language, HUD hereby consents to a collateral assignment of this contract, right? Subject to the following conditions. And again, this means, don't give us the PBRA consent to assignment form. This is not plain old vanilla PBRA. This is RAD PBRA. There are ownership and control requirements, so these conditions apply. All right, and why take a separate form? We hereby consent to it. Okay, you've got it here. You've got our consent explicitly, but it's the consent to assignment, the lender taking over the project, lender taking over the HAP contract, receiving the HAP payments, for a limited period of time to find a permanent replacement owner that meets the statutory requirements. And then at the end here we have the tax credit provisions. Those are the same, formerly the LIHTC rider provisions. Note that the transfer provisions of the investor members and partners, the equity investor is the partner or member of the owner entity itself. So if you've got a fund and the owner, if you're changing investors in the fund, we don't track that. We don't carry that, particularly after your investment has been made. The revised 2530 regulations that came out today, which have been published today in the Federal Register, clarify that LIHTC investors are exempt from 2530 submissions. And so again here, but if you are actually transferring the investor member itself, then this is the provisions there talking about that.
I believe that's it. To save our time and our eyes, we won't go through the PBV contract in the same way because really the changes are exactly parallel. They might use different words or be in different sections, but they achieve the same effect. So with that, let's see if there are any other questions on the document we just walked through, or more generally.
Sorry, there is one other change in the PBV HAP contract that's just to mention. In the consents to assignment, in the previous drafts of the consents, I think the HUD took the place of the contract administrator in providing certain consents, and this this clarifies that contract administrator must still provide consents. HUD consent is also required. The PHAs are usually the contract administrators in the PBV HAP contract. So that language is quite clearer now, and certainly does provide for both consents, and then goes ahead and, in the same way that we just walked through, provide several consents within the document.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Okay, so we'll go to questions now. There's just one written question, which is, will the PowerPoint slides be available on the resource desk on our website? Yes, we'll post these following this presentation, so you guys can have that available. I think we can also post and the recording. All right, we're going to have this whole session recorded, so you can watch it over and over again. And if you'd like to hear your voice on the session, call in now with your own question, with an additional question, because otherwise I don't think we have any other items that folks have.
And if you call in the next 30 seconds, there'll be a matching question.
Okay.
So someone wrote. Vicki.
Vicki, you're on the line. Can you hear? I think
unless you have a headset, if you haven't called into the conference call, we can't call you.
Can't hear you.
So this is something for anybody who is getting their audio through their computer. Your computer may not have a microphone to catch your questions, so you may need a headset for your computer, or you may need to call into the conference call line in order for us to be able to hear you.
One question that I've gotten on the use agreement was with the recordation of the use agreement, and with the changes that we've made to the use agreement, primarily acknowledging the role of the project owner in a ground lease scenario. We do allow for the ground lease to be recorded prior to the use agreement. I know that was confusing and contentious for a lot of folks earlier, so just to reiterate, you can record the ground lease first and then record the use agreement. I know that helps with some LIHTC acquisition valuations as well. We are, in order to do that, however, we will require the HUD required provisions for ground leases. We will require them in all ground leases, and we are revising those to indicate that the ground lease will be subordinate to the use agreement when the use agreement is entered into. So we'll have self-subordinating language in the ground lease as a requirement, and that will allow us to record the ground lease prior to the use agreement. This is for all my lawyer friends on the line. Hey guys, geeking out on that.
I guess another thing we wanted to mention, we talked about the checklist. And another thing that we're working on, major activity, is a fair housing civil rights relocation notice, which is sort of a companion guidance piece. And we're still working with OMB on their comments to that notice, but we very well may be publishing that for public comment in the next 30 days or so.
A lot of people are under the misconception that because it's taken so long to get out, there are major changes coming. No, guys, it turns out that when you have a notice that's titled like fair housing and civil rights and relocation, everyone in the administration wants to look at it before we publish it.
It's
so
big. It's very big.
Yeah, so let's don't read too much into that.
No, don't. And I think if anything, it's just more guidance. We're further clarifying some of the relocation guidance that's already out there. We're going into more detail about what was in the 2015 RAD notice. Mm-hmm. And I think, it's just another way to help safeguard the PHAs, to be sure they're really following the requirements, and also for us to be sure that we're meeting the RAD goals at the same time.
And one of the things that is in the package of documents is the current FHEO accessibility and relocation checklist. Folks will notice that we did not make very many changes to that document because we are waiting until we can have the notice be actual in effect, and then we will be doing a more comprehensive relook at that checklist when it's also, as Will mentioned, going to be renamed and cover things more in line with the notice itself when the notice comes out. So folks have heard us say before that there will, and I want to reiterate here, that that checklist will be subject to its own additional comment period. So the comments we did get on the checklist we have not lost. So we will be looking at those to the extent that we didn't incorporate anything. We will be doing another review of those as we prepare a future checklist. But that's why there is not much change in the current checklist.
Do we have a question? So exciting.
So does someone want to read it? Will?
Sure. The question is about the rehab assistance payments. If a project had 40 units occupied before conversion, and then after conversion, tenants are relocated for construction, can the owner continue to get rental assistance payments for all 40 units? What if those units are torn down and no one is living there? And are those rehab assistance payments during the initial year and also during the first full year, post the initial year? That's it. So we have, the first thing I want to do is direct folks to, with questions about the initial year funding, to instructions we posted a couple of months ago that are now on the resource desk, something along the lines of it, initial year funding instructions or something like that. That explains how the funding works in the first year and goes into, I believe it goes into some description on rehab assistance payments. So yeah, if a project was receiving operating subsidy, to be more precise than whether it was occupied, but if it's occupied, that's a pretty good sign. Then it's eligible for rehab assistance payments for all those units, which go into effect as soon as the HAP contract is executed, is effective. And during the initial year, the public housing subsidy essentially takes the place of the rehab assistance payments, or is equal to the amount of the rehab assistance payments. So during the initial year, the property is due that public housing subsidy that it would have otherwise been getting for the balance of the year. And then come the new calendar year, the actual number that's in the HAP contract for the rehab assistance payments, whether $500 per unit per month or whatever it may be, is the effective number. But I think there's more guidance on that on the resource desk.
But also, it is a bit of a misnomer. Rehab assistance payments, new construction counts as rehab for rehab assistance payment purposes.
Right.
As well.
Good point. Yeah. So if you're demolishing a building and starting and rebuilding, that it still takes effect.
Mm-hmm. This is Bev. I also want to say, and I guess I want to ask, I think a lot of people have been confused about the initial calendar year, and they're calling it rehab assistance payments, and they're trying to look at what was that dollar figure. But I think what you just said, and what I understand it to be, is don't look at the rehab assistance payment unit dollar number. What you have the first year is still what you have the first year, which is what is going to be in your initial year funding tool, which is going to be coming from your original appropriations through public housing. So definitely think of the first calendar year in a different way from the next year that will follow.
Thanks, Bev.
Year of conversion versus first full year versus. It's confusing terminology. We're trying to clarify.
Calendar year in which you close.
Well, I mean, we use specific terms in the HAP contract, so that's not the term that we use. So they're clarified.
So I think that we have gone through all the questions that have come by writing, and I don't see any hands raised for verbal questions. I think we're also just about at the 3 o'clock hour, or at least East Coast. We hope this was useful. We are we wanted to sort of talk you through a little bit of these documents as you are reviewing them during the comment period. We are, any comment is welcome. We are particularly interested in comments that are clearing up what could be errors or sort of technical things, or things that are just were not clear. We have spent a fair amount of time on the policy questions, so I think that most of the policy questions were aired in the prior comments, but certainly the comments is the next 30 days, and then we will respond during, we will review the documents and the comments and bring this process to completion in a couple months. So thanks very much. I hope the webinar was useful, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon.